thought it'd be easier working up to this one. The profession first. The Conti were assembled in such a way to maximize the efficiency of the small teams. From the first time we lit up an ostium, we could see just how numerous the other realms were. Every expedition had to bring back as much information as possible. The envoy was the driver of the mission, the axle of the wheel, so to speak. We would not only assemble all the gathered information from each mission, but we would have the most background and understanding of a realm before embarking on the next one. The first spoke of the wheel was the Navigator, a broadly important function because the Navigator would also pilot the vehicle used on an expedition. In most cases, it was a Corvus of some variety. Using the ship's main directional instruments, the Navigator would map the topography of all the surrounding areas traveled. Ministerium cartographers, like my father was, would then take that data and update the maps of that particular realm to help the elders in planning upcoming expeditions. The second spoke was the Mechanist. They would function as a team member by repairing the ship or lorica suits to maintain everyone's protection in the foreign realm. As a professional in the energy sciences, they would also take broad readings of the thermodynamics of the weather, groundwater, movement of the stars, relative motion of objects, and the flow of energy. Their initial readings were more important than ever. The first realm that was visited with differing physics almost killed everyone on the mission. Only the pilot survived because of the added protection of the ship's flight deck. Everyone else was boiled alive when the blood in their veins suddenly burst like an overpressured steam driver. The pilot would succumb to internal damage a week later, after giving his report. Since then, first excursions into realms carried much heavier protection and preparation. The third spoke of the wheel was the Alchemist. Their knowledge of the elements was critical to finding resources that could be mined from each realm. Phasite, Nosite, and Jovian crystals of any variety were first priority, but regular elements were also important. Gold, platinum, silver, iron, lead, titanium, aluminum, mercury, marble, granite, limestone, and etc. were still critical resources. Our work was never done, and our shipbuilders never ceased, since we were essentially at war with the rest of the universe. The Alchemist was also the most knowledgeable at finding available resources for the contus, should they be stranded somewhere. Finally, there's the Galenus. They were the medic, the anthropologist, the surgeon. They were the one who would keep the rest of the contus alive should any member become wounded. As the professional of the life sciences, they held the most understanding of the plants or animals that might be encountered. This was important for harvesting new medicines and resources from these creatures. However, it was also important that they understand the fastest way to slay any creature in particular, should it become a threat. Whether by fire, trauma, acid, poison, or some other means, knowing a creature's weakness was the first thing that needed to be learned. We had the benefit of having an exceptional Galenus. She was the only thing in all the realms brighter than Sol itself. To conclude my initial impressions of the members of Contus Germanica 7, I shall now cover our Galenus. Defleur is a Frankish woman from Lutetia. She stands about 68 uncia tall with raven black hair cropped short. She has icy blue eyes like cut gemstones of aquamarine. They're quite striking, and would be intimidating if not for her warm smile. My first impression of her was quite unexpected, because it was actually my second impression of her. The Valetudinarium nearest Castrum Monachium primarily services injured legionaries, or those who work around the fortress. This would include members of Contus, like myself. Last spring, I happened to be engaging in some friendly sport with some classmates from my academy days, whom I hadn't seen in ages. Among those sports was javelin. I discovered one of my classmates either had very good or very poor aim. The spear, launched from the opposite side of the field, pinned my left foot into the ground with an impact so sudden and shocking, I thought I'd stepped on an incendiary mine. Both sides of the javelin had to be cut because the piece lodged between my bones and would not slide free. I sat for an unfortunately long time while the brew I was provided just barely tempered the pain. Finally, a Galenus was free to see me. A Galenus named Defleur. She walked into the room and upon seeing the section of javelin, shot me a look that could make a gladiator wilt. Her first words to me were, "Someone was not standing where they should be." Her words, like those of a disappointed instructor, seared a whole new pain in me which almost drove me to stand up and choose the bite of the javelin to escape. But before I could consciously commit to such a plan, she had already materialized a needle out of thin air and driven it down into my ankle. The pinch was sudden, but then quickly faded to nothing. Defleur pulled back the sleeve of her surgeon's robe, revealing the intricate Galenus case-tooth extending down from her elbow. A dozen spider-like brass arms extended from the joints in the wrist and quickly began prodding at the remains of the spear. Two of the arms drilled precision holes down the middle, while several more pressed in on all sides of the rod until it collapsed inward. Once loose enough, they quickly pulled the foreign fragments from my foot. Once free, the arms began working on the displaced bones. Her icy blue eyes stared unblinkingly at the wound as the multitude of machines moved to her inner commands. Her right hand produced a second needle, and at this point I assumed she was somehow concealing an ostium in her glove. With the bones realigned, she plunged the needle sideways into the wound in the direction of my heel. The salve would take time, coaxing my body to fill the gap, but until then a white bandage would remain wrapped all the way up my calf like a stocking. After providing me crutches to use for the following few days, she gave me a final command. No more javelin. 5 months later, the Fée de Fleur that Sophia introduced me to seemed to have no memory of the incident. I intend to keep it that way. It was the end of Defleur's shift, and it was Sophia who recommended the three of us stop by the cafe down the street. As Trachis had said, Defleur is not one to pass up on fine foods. The conversation began as an extension of Sophia telling me about her many siblings. Fée only has one, an older sister. She had joined Legio Gallica upon finishing her primary studies. She had chosen the life of a proper soldier, and to Fée's dismay, was hurt many times in battle. There, we should be recording now.
Oh, très bon. So may I speak freely?
Yes, you can speak freely now that Sophia is gone.
Oh no.
So, first, could you state your title and name?
Galenus Fée à la Ruse Defleur.
How long have you been a member of Contus Germanica 7?
Oh, I don't know. Something like 5 years, I think.
Was that right after your apprenticeship?
No, not directly after, no. I spent about a year or so in the hospital full time.
Why did you wish to split your time between the Asclepium and Ministerium?
I am able to speak freely.
As freely as you wish, this is going to be chronicled.
It is sometimes very difficult to see those that finally reach our doors. In so many cases, it is far too late to do anything for them. No amount of potions or advanced mechanics can pull back someone who is already one step into the boat of the ferryman. While we can ease their suffering, waiting and watching them die is a feeling I cannot bear. I may see fewer patients, but by joining those like you on this dangerous expedition, there is a chance I could save those risking themselves before it is too late. Even then, I failed far more times than I can bear.
You mean my predecessor?
Carl was a kind man. He did not deserve such a sudden and horrific fate.
I'm sure you did everything you could.
I did not even get a chance to touch him. By the time we heard his screams, the flesh was already dripping from his bones. After that, I went to the Galenus Nucci and demanded that we requisition the Tetra Armor.
It was you who convinced him.
I threatened to leave the Galenus. Carl was the third envoy to die since I've been with them, and I refuse to lose another.
I don't plan on dying anytime soon.
Merci.
Should I assume that that is your advice for me going forward? Don't die?
No. My advice for you is, Don't assume you can only die beyond the gates.
I wasn't quite sure how to react to her final statement, so I ended the recording there. Aside from our first mission to procure the Crimson Mistletoe, a few more of our expeditions have required Defleur's specialties. One of these involved a trip to a menagerie. I would be lying if I said I wasn't a bit nervous. Menagerie 1144 contained a specimen of reptile called a Stelioarchus, or rainbow lizard. Only a few realms contained the species originally, but in the centuries since their discovery, we have seeded them everywhere we set foot. The liver of the Stelioarchus provides such a powerful regenerative panacea, it is used to regrow entire limbs, recreate entire organs, or restore mobility to the paralyzed. Once a population of lizards reaches a certain phase of their life cycle, we harvest the eldest specimens for creating the salve. It is one of our most critical medicinal resources, and many expeditions occur just to harvest the most recent batch of available creatures. Unfortunately, the next population due for thinning was in Menagerie 1144, which is populated with a species of giant spider. They grow to roughly 5 cubits long and weigh as much as a tall man in a full suit of armor. This was the mission that I witnessed Galenus Defleur's weapon specialty. 3 of the spiders were lingering around the grove where the lizards usually nest, and we were able to inspect the scene from a perched vantage point. Once settled in, Defleur extended the length of her procobolist. The finely machined tube reached out nearly 2 cubits from her shoulder, carrying shards of Jovian bolts ready to launch. Once the first spider stepped in her lens, she shot the first bolt. Like a lightning strike, the hardened crystal pierced the fleshy body of the spider, causing it to scatter around in pain until slowly coming to a stop. The first thing learned about the creature was which organ was its weak point. After an initial frenzy, the 2 other creatures slowed down long enough that she could fire a second bolt through the body of the second spider. After another moment, the third was dispatched. It was impressive marksmanship. Once clear, we brought in the containers from the Corvus and rounded up the appropriate lizards as Faye directed. The population were quite domesticated, used to the cycle trained into them from a millennium of selective breeding. It wouldn't be long until we had returned to Monachium. Overall, my impressions of the contus have been quite positive. While there are some warnings I'm taking quite seriously, I feel like we shall get along very well. Signed, Ulysses Adelbrecht, Envoy, Contus Germanica 7, 21 Augustus 2403.
What are you doing? What's that down? No, you do not have permission to record me. Go away. You're going to be sleeping outside. You know, despite everything, I still enjoy counting the stars. To look up at the sky every night, trying to find the new ones. Good night, my love.